Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 8th meeting of the Urban Design Commission. Can we have a roll call, please?
Douglas Gasek.
Here.
Jim Sawhill.
Here.
Andrew Garcia.
Here.
Jeff Dinwiddie.
Here.
Thomas Tiber.
Here.
Steve Pratt.
Here.
Lori Abel. Here.
We have one agenda change I'd like to announce. We had previously scheduled resolution for approval 2012-003, a resolution for the South Anchorage High Stadium approval, and staff has withdrawn that resolution to complete some additional work and review on that before we act on it, so we won't be having that resolution tonight. That brings us to our next order of business is minutes. We have no minutes for tonight. Next is disclosures. Does anyone have any disclosures tonight? Ms. Abel?
Yes, I used to work for UAA, and I do regularly sell them plants.
And do you feel that's going to prohibit you from acting fairly on this proposal
No.
tonight?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other disclosures? Mm-hmm. Luckily, we have our secretary to keep us square, and she's advised me that it would be better to take a vote on the potential conflict of interest, so we'll proceed with that. Can I have a motion to direct Ms. Abel to participate? Mr. Pratt? Can we have a second? Seconded by Mr. Garcia. And do you have any discussion of your motion, Mr. Pratt?
Yes, I don't believe that Ms. Abel's potential conflict would compromise her ability to act fairly or unduly influence this proceeding at all because of the nature of her disclosure.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia, do you have any additional comments?
None at this time.
Thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that is approved. You are directed to participate. Are there any other disclosures? Evidently not. Our next item of business is the consent agenda. We have under our consent agenda case 2011-123. The applicant is Municipality of Anchorage. It's for a final site plan approval. Can I have a motion for approval of the consent agenda? Mr. Gasek, approved by Mr. Garza. Mr. Gasek, would you like to have any discussion on the consent agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. Is there any objection to the consent agenda? Seeing none, that is approved. Our next item of business under the regular agenda was the Mountain Air project, which has been postponed, and under public hearings. Okay. We need a motion to postpone for the record case 2012-015. The applicant is the Municipality of Anchorage. It's a site plan approval for Mountain Air Drive. May I have a motion to postpone indefinitely? Mr. Garza, seconded by Mr. Dinwiddie. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that is approved. Thank you. We want to keep you happy, Jill. Our first case tonight is a public hearing. It's case 2011-144. The petitioner is UAA Facilities Planning and Construction. The request is a site plan approval and concept landscape plan approval for a public facility. It is for the proposed UAA Sports Center. The project is located at the corner of Providence Drive and Elmore Road. Staff, may we have a presentation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. UAA is undertaking the construction of a major new sports facility. Their intended parking plan makes use of a shared parking with nearby University and Providence Hospital parking lots. Some of these shared parking lots are located on the north side of Providence Drive from the arena. Providence Drive is a minor arterial. Crossing of an arterial under a shared parking arrangement requires an approved variance from the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals. The variance request will be decided by ZEBA on February 9th, 2012, which is tomorrow night. Also, using the shared parking with other sites, as I mentioned earlier with UAA and at Providence, there is a code regulation that discusses distance to parking spaces. Shared parking spaces for uses other than residential shall be within 800 feet of the primary entrance of the facility, in this case the sports arena. The traffic engineer and the planning director may approve a portion of shared parking spaces at a greater distance based on factors such as pedestrian environment, availability of valet parking, weather protection, and the type of uses served. The traffic engineer and the planning director have approved a waiver to allow a portion of the parking spaces to be located a greater distance than 800 feet from the primary entrance. If you look through your packet, you'll see the waiver that was signed by the traffic engineer and the director of community development. And also in your packet, you'll see an aerial photograph with concentric circles drawn on it that shows 800 feet and 1,000 feet, and those locations of those parking spaces with how they fall within that distance. Also, the final traffic impact analysis has been accepted by both MOA and DOT, and that too is included in your packet. The submittal does not make it explicit that the petitioner is seeking the review of new roadway improvements, the addition of Health Drive, a proposed roundabout at the intersection of Elmore Road and Health Drive, and extension of Sharon Gagnon Lane. The roadway also will require final site plan review and concept landscape review, and then, of course, follow up with final landscape review. The Universities and Medical District Framework Master Plan, otherwise known as UMed Plan, contains many design guidelines, which are detailed in the staff's report. Any building that's constructed in the UMed district has to, abide by these guidelines. The largest parking lot has a sizable expanse of asphalt with 3 drainage swales. The swales will capture parking lot runoff and eventually direct it to the adjacent wooded areas into a detention area. The swales will have to incorporate trees and shrubs to meet required interior parking lot landscaping. The department recommendations are listed on pages 9 and 10. The condition number 7 could be deleted at this point because staff had written this prior to receiving approval from the state and the municipality on the approval of the TIA. So number 7 could be deleted. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Pratt?
Yeah, thanks for your report. On the parking, going through the documents and reviewing the plan, it appeared to me that the extended parking would only be used on a few occasions when there's essentially a lot of traffic for very popular sporting events, and I assume during those events there'll be traffic control and police and things like that.
Through the chair, Mr. Pratt, yes, there will be some sort of traffic control. UAA will have to submit to the traffic department a traffic control plan, parking management plan, which all those will be detailed and then approved or revised and approved. And it's a kind of iterative process to get that. But yes, they will have to submit the plan that you described. And those additional parking lots will be used just during big sporting events and graduation ceremonies, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions of staff? I had a couple. What is your understanding of the off-site improvements that will be required of this project?
You mean in terms of the parking?
No, in terms of intersection construction,
Oh, yes.
sidewalk construction,
Right.
those things.
They will have to do a sidewalk. I think one of the conditions is to put a sidewalk along Elmore Road that will connect up with Providence, the existing sidewalk on Providence Drive. There isn't one there currently. And in terms of the roundabout, I'm not sure when that is scheduled for, completion or even who's responsible for doing that. But the petitioner may be able to answer that question.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions of staff? Apparently not. Would the applicant please go through rules? Okay. While you're setting up, I'll go ahead and go through the procedures for a public hearing. After the staff presentation is complete, the public hearing, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in our rules. The petitioner has 10 minutes. They may reserve part of that time for rebuttal. Representatives of group have 5 minutes. Individuals have 3 minutes. And we'll give you a little bit of time here to get set up.
Mr. Commissioner and members of the Commission, we would actually, because it's a very complicated project in actuality, we would like to request a little bit of additional time beyond 10 minutes. We're going to try to keep it absolutely at that. We'd like a little time for rebuttal at the end, only as an opportunity to come back and answer questions that you as the Commissioners may have. But we will work very hard to keep it within the 10 minutes, but I do ask a little bit of grace on that, only because it's a large and complicated project.
Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Terry Schoenthal. I'm with the firm of USKH and representing the University of Alaska Anchorage this evening with regard to the new UAA sports arena. With me tonight are members of the...
Hold just 1 second. Okay. All right. As far as your request for some additional time, let's try 10 minutes and try to stick with that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions and opportunities to expand on your presentation. We'll try to give you a little bit of leeway, but we would like to stick to the 10 minutes if possible. So let's give it a run and see how far we get.
Very good. Again, my name is Terry Schoenthal. I'm with USKH and representing the University of Alaska Anchorage this evening in requesting site plan approval for the new UAA sports arena. With me is Phil Worth from Kittleson Associates, the traffic planners, and he'll be available to answer questions relative to the parking studies and the traffic that's been done to date. Also with me are representatives from UAA, including Chris Terlides, the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Facilities, John Founts, also from Facilities, and the UAA Project Manager, Stan Vanover. And they may be asked at some points to address specific questions relative to the project. As an opening, I would like to note that in past years, the site plan approval has actually fallen within the realm of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and only in relatively recent times really has it come to the UDC as a regulatory approval authority. And I would just like to note the standard for this. I think that there's been a few questions about the completed level of the drawings and so forth on this, but what I would like to note is that with Planning and Zoning, at the Planning and Zoning Commission, the site plan approval was generally submitted at a concept level which means it provides a really good idea of how the whole thing's going to work, but it doesn't include a lot of dimensions on everything. They're just not completed at that point. And the reason for that is that the petitioner didn't have to have a wholly complete set of plans. He didn't have to spend all of that money if, in fact, it wasn't going to be approved as a site plan approval. And I would revert back to the Title 21, the standards. And the standard for approval on site plan approval is that the Commission shall review a proposed site selection or site plan for consistency with the goals, policies, and land use designations of the comprehensive plan and other municipal plans adopted by the Assembly, conformance to the requirements of this title, and the effects of the proposal on the areas surrounding the site. We've tried to provide detailed enough information to make that decision, to take a look at how does this impact the surrounding site, and is it in conformance with the plans and goals of our comprehensive plan, of the UMed plan, and a variety of others. We acknowledge that all of the design isn't on the plans at this point, but in fact, in times past, it's been addressed as a planning review and not a site design review. And so that interpretation of it is obviously ours, and we look to you for your judgment on this. But I would like to revert back to the actual standards as they're identified in Title 21. The project itself is located at the corner of Providence Drive and Elmore Road, and it's a new sports arena that includes training areas, seating for 5,600 patrons, and it is it's going to be a great new facility, to be honest. And it's a bit complicated because of the fact that we have worked to enter into joint parking agreements with Providence Alaska Medical Center. And the reason for that is so that we can preserve some portion of the site so that it isn't entirely taken up by parking. Because in actuality, if you were to take a look at the UMed district as a whole, much of the parking there goes unoccupied during the time that the UAA arena would actually be in use. So the idea of a joint parking is totally consistent with the UMed plan. In fact, the UMed plan specifically encourages examining joint parking agreements. The comprehensive plan doesn't go into specifics about encouraging joint parking agreements, but it does encourage efficient parking. And one way to accomplish that is really through a joint parking agreement. In our case, obviously, some of the parking is located on the north side of Providence Drive, and people will have to cross that street from farther away. Most of the parking is readily available on the south side for most events. In cases where the entire arena is full, where it's a concert or some special event, a graduation perhaps, the UAA acknowledges that there's going to have to be a parking plan put in place that relies on shuttles from remote parking lots and a variety of other techniques, but they're prepared to take those actions. I think, if we could. One of the things that I would like to note is that Ms. Ferguson pointed out that we need to come back for site plan approval on the roads. We've submitted drawings that included all of the pieces you see on the drawings are part of this project. The roundabout project is the upgrade to Health Drive. I think it's relatively clear on the plans. We've had a number of meetings with the municipality on this, specifically with the director of the planning department, who has told us that we can apply for final site plan approval for the entire project tonight, and that's what we're requesting of you. If, as Ms. Ferguson notes, there's a need to come back for a site plan approval of the roads, we'd like to confirm that with the planning director, and we'll do so. But what we ask tonight is for a complete site plan approval for the entire package, which UAA is providing the design and construction, providing design and construction of the roundabout on Elmore Road. It's providing all of the Health Drive improvements. It's providing all of the parking improvements that are shown on that drawing. It's providing the stub out that leads toward Alaska Pacific University. And there are a number of off-site improvements, but all of those improvements actually lend themselves to a greater improvement of the UMed district. And that comes in fact, through the traffic impact analysis, which perhaps Phil could address at some point, traffic on Providence Drive will be reduced as a result of these improvements, because traffic going to Providence Hospital has a great new route out onto Elmore Drive that doesn't exist right now. To get into the hospital virtually, most of the traffic has to flow to Providence Drive under the current scenario. And in our proposal, with the addition of the health drive, there's an entirely new and good access into the hospital area. So what I'd like to cover now are there were 19 project conditions identified, and this is actually pretty easy and pretty straightforward for us to address. I actually brought along some printed copies that I can distribute in a minute. Phil can hand those out, but everything looks a little green on this one right here, but what I'm trying to show here is that anything in green we accept. So of all of those conditions that you see, conditions 1 through 7 are all accepted as conditions of approval. We don't have any issues with those. Conditions 8 through 14 are traffic related. I'm going to let Phil talk a little bit about that, but what we would really like to do there is combine them into a single condition that addresses the design standards that we will meet to accomplish those. And perhaps I could turn it over to Phil for just a minute to speak to those.
Good evening. Again, my name is Philip Worth. I'm with the firm Kittleson & Associates. We have an office here in Anchorage. We performed the traffic impact study that's been approved by the MOA and DOT. Just to quickly highlight what these conditions cover are, in one form or another, something that speaks specifically to transportation. And as you skim over these, what you see is many questions or points being made about the design of the transportation facilities. And having reviewed these, my conclusion was what you're really looking for is a condition that says when we design the facilities, they will be designed in accordance with the MOA and the DOT standards, that all of these facilities will come online in accordance with their expectations and standards. And if I'm right about my interpretation of where you were going with these, I'd say let's write a condition that simply stipulates that the design of all transportation facilities associated with this arena project will be to the standards of the MOA and the DOT. Yeah, page down. So here you see what we're proposing is the new number 7, which unfortunately number 7 just got deleted, but it would still be the new one that we're suggesting. So roadway design for all roadways in the project to include lane widths, turning radii, pedestrian facilities, lighting, and control devices, that being at the intersections, shall be in conformance with Alaska DOT Pre-Construction Manual for Roadway Design and/or the Municipality of Anchorage Design Criteria Manual. So that's our proposed or suggested replacement of those other criteria that you've considered from staff, all in one form or another addressing design issues.
If you take a look then, condition number 15 is obtain a parking agreement on a form approved by MOA. Number 16, likewise, those are all conditions that are acceptable to us. Continuing on, in parentheses under each of those numbers, I've identified what the new number would be based on the aggregation of all of those other ones.
Please continue.
So tonight we're also seeking a preliminary landscape approval, and on the plans that you've received, we've provided a concept level of that landscape throughout the site. The plants weren't all identified on that at that point. We will be coming back for final landscape approval, and you'll have the opportunity to look at all of that in detail. But the landscape is consistent both with the way that Providence Alaska Medical Center addresses their landscapes and the way UAA addresses theirs, and both have a very high reputation of both care and ongoing maintenance to the plant materials. I believe that there's a great pedestrian link that goes from existing student housing that goes over to the corner of Providence and Elmore that actually will allow students to transit right through the facility and get a little warm up on a cold winter day, and we've had a few of those this year. In addition, the general exterior appearance of the building is going to be consistent with many of the facilities that have recently been completed on the campus, such as health sciences and integrated science and other of the consortium library, I would say. But they're not all of a uniform type, but they're all of a high level of design and quality, and I think that's what we're calling out in terms of materials for the new facility.
Thank you. At this point, I'll open it up to questions of the applicant. Mr. Gasek?
Yeah, I had one question on the staff recommendations that wasn't addressed in this outline that you provided there, and that was on staff recommendation 13, especially the piece that says consider putting a separated grade pedestrian connection to the existing Chester Creek area instead of that roundabout, or instead of the pedestrian surface crossing on that near that roundabout at Elmore and Health Drive, just to continue that connectivity of our trail system and pedestrian connectivity in that area. How would you address that?
Well, I think the pedestrian trail connectivity is actually there. There's an underpass that goes under Elmore Road right there that hooks into that. New pathways will connect to that from the near the intersection. There is a crosswalk still at the roundabout itself. And the sense I got from reading the staff recommendation was consider removing those crosswalks. Well, the issue really is that we don't have that choice. This is a DOT roadway project, and they really have the final call on that, and it's really pretty unlikely that they're going to accept removal of those crosswalks. It's something we've had ongoing discussions with the DOT about, but I think a key thing is that Elmore Road is a DOT roadway, and they treat it that way.
And I thought this was more of getting from the arena over to that other underground path, so getting across Health Drive. Right, yeah, Health Drive. So,
Go ahead.
You have the sports arena here and Health Drive there, so some sort of pedestrian connection to get to that next underpass there.
Yeah.
So is there some way that could be addressed just as an alternative to kind of keep in line with that staff recommendation and to have more separated paths in the area just to create a safer environment for people, especially when there's large numbers trying to get across a roadway?
Yeah. We think those concerns have been addressed, and let me see if I can talk you through them real quickly. And I'll point up at the screen as if you can all see that screen, sorry. But just to get you oriented, west is up and north is to the right. And so the new roadway that you see running from west at the top to east at the bottom is the Health Drive extension. Connects at what we're depicting as a roundabout on Elmore. There are a variety of pedestrian crossings provided in the design concept across Health Drive as it goes from Wellness at the top of the drawing to Elmore at the bottom. The volume of traffic on Health Drive is, of course, going to vary throughout the day. The largest volumes are going to occur in the morning and in the evening, as largely the staff to and from Providence Medical Center will be using this road to gain access to Elmore. But students that are living in the residential to the south of Health will have 3 separate pedestrian crossing locations to rely on simply to move to the arena and beyond to the campus proper. As you work your way toward the roundabout, You've also got pedestrian facilities that are going alongside of Health Drive on both sides. And if you were to want to cross Elmore, you'll have a pedestrian crossing connection that leads you to the undercrossing that exists today. If you would prefer not to cross Elmore properly, or Elmore, it's not proper or improper, but to cross at the intersection. Or, however the intersection is treated, there'll be a safe pedestrian crossing at the intersection as well.
And I do see the pedestrian crossings, the surface pedestrian crossings. I think the idea was, were other alternatives considered, bridges or underpasses of that roadway to maintain the connectivity? And that was, I think, how the staff recommendation was written, just to consider other alternatives to those surface pedestrian crossings. So I think that was the request. And was that a consideration ever or no?
Well, we have looked at a variety of pedestrian treatments in different locations around the site that were both grade separated and at grade, and took into consideration the volume of pedestrian movements, the volume of vehicular movements, and the timing of those movements. Are they happening simultaneously or at separate periods of the day? And conclusions that we drew were, as I stated, that the at-grade crossings for the preponderance of movements throughout the normal course of a day are such that we can safely accommodate their movements at grade.
Okay.
I think I'll take my opportunity to answer a few questions before I get to Mr. Dinwiddie. I guess I have lots of questions and lots of concerns with this proposal. This is a major facility. 5,600 streets. It's basically another Sullivan Arena. So it's a big facility, and at peak events, we're going to have lots of traffic. And I think we've all experienced what it's like to try to get to Sullivan Arena during a peak event. I live in South Anchorage, so I come down A Street, and I get into a queue about fireweed and crawl through that queue all the way to Sullivan Arena. So I'm trying to envision the same level of traffic trying to get to this site. And one of my biggest concerns is this site is next to the emergency room for Providence Hospital. And so I'm very concerned that we're going to have a congested roadway when emergency vehicles are trying to access that very important facilities. So one of my concerns is queuing. What kind of stacking of the vehicles we're going to have. And my biggest concern is with the all-way stops. How far are these all-way stops going to back up? And I didn't see a queuing analysis in your traffic study. And there's queuing of the all-way intersection at Elmore and Providence. And is that going to back up into your roundabout and fail your roundabout? So that's one of my first questions. And then we have 3 all-way stops on Wellness Drive, and so especially on Wellness and Health Drive. I noted that the level of service of that all-way stop is going to go to a level of service D in, I forget if it was 2014 or 2024. So, I'm just picturing this congested roadway. I understand at major events we have manual traffic control, we have a traffic management plan, and, we're going to learn as we go. But I'm just very concerned that, this project is going forward without one of the obvious solutions that needs to be in place, which is the extension of Elmore Drive through the university over to Northern Lights. So, I have lots of statements, lots of questions there. The other thing I looked at when I was looking at all this, it was unclear to me as to what improvements were going to be in place. And I was really puzzled that no improvements were recommended for Elmore and Providence, that all-way stop. I was a little skeptical that some of the traffic distributions that were proposed are going to occur, and that intersection won't cause additional problems and need to be signalized. So I guess I threw out a lot of things, but initially, can you address queuing and the all-way stops? It would be my first question.
Certainly. I'll give it a try. Well, let's start with queuing. So the queuing analysis, I'm going to back up a step. There were 2 time frames that we were asked to analyze. One is what's referred to as the system peak hour of the transportation system. So that's when the largest amount of traffic is on the transportation system on a regular basis. In this case, in the UMEN district, that's between 4:45 p.m. and 5:45 p.m. on a typical weekday. So we had to study that condition. The other condition that we had to study was timing of a major event at the arena on a regular basis, which turns out to be an event that starts on a weekday evening at about 7 p.m. So the first thing that we came to understand was traffic in the district dissipates fairly quickly after that peak hour, that system peak hour. So from 6 to 7 p.m., traffic in the area is going down, which creates, in essence, more capacity for the arena traffic to have available to it as it's beginning to arrive for that event that's scheduled to start at 7 p.m. The analysis shows that if nothing was done here, meaning no arena was built and Health Drive wasn't extended and the other planned transportation improvements associated with the site development, the transportation system would work worse than if we built the arena and allowed it to operate under normal conditions with these planned improvements. So that's the facts of the analysis that have been reviewed and approved by the MOA and the DOT. So we're all in agreement about those. Now I've set the stage and I can start to answer your questions. Queuing, of course, is going to be an issue, a question at certain times of the day. During that system peak hour, that's when we all generally witness the largest queuing occurring at our major intersections, whether it's the all-way stop at Providence Elmore or, much further away at the Tudor-Elmore intersection, where, again, we get fairly long queues that develop. What the analysis shows is that the queuing is within acceptable ranges for these intersections the way they're controlled today. And this is true, the analysis shows continuously, this is true under 2014 conditions as long as we build the improvements. With the arena under normal or typical operating conditions during that system peak hour, and also when the arena is operating at a capacity event in that later time frame, an event starting at 7 p.m. So I'm not questioning your concerns about the queuing, but the confidence that we gain is through the analysis and the scrutiny that it's been given by myself as well as members of the traffic department at the MOA and DOT representatives. Lastly, I think to hit home on a particular intersection of concern, it would be the Providence-Elmore intersection. Because here we have two major facilities that are coming together, and oddly enough, it's at an always stop controlled intersection. Not your typical treatment for those kinds of facilities. And how in the world can that continue to work into the future? Well, the secret is Health Drive. Because what happens is today, those parking garages that are at the very top of the site plan, that are on the west side of Wellness, those parking garages unload their traffic and they either go north on Wellness to Providence or they go south on Wellness to eventually find their way down to Tudor. When you build Health Drive, that traffic that wants to be on Elmore is going to go directly to Elmore, and it will no longer be up on Providence. It will no longer have to go through the Providence-Elmore intersection in order to get to the segment of Elmore that it wants to be on, which is the segment that takes them back down to Tudor. So this is the secret to the solution. It's the fact that that traffic will naturally reroute because it's a shorter, quicker route to take than to go up to Providence simply to come back down again. And the relief that that provides is measured or realized at the Providence-Elmore intersection. That's what makes it work in the future. I don't know if I hit all of them, but hopefully I got some.
You did, and I agree the Health Drive connection is an important link and will substantially improve traffic circulation in the area. You said there will be acceptable queuing, and I'd like a little more definition of that. Did you estimate queue lengths? Are they going to go from intersection to intersection, particularly on Providence Drive going west of Wellness? They're not going to queue up, and they're not going to block the Providence emergency room entrance?
To start with on the queuing, the queuing is examined to look for exactly what you're highlighting. When the queuing at one intersection, we call it spills back and impacts an upstream intersection. For me, a great example of that would be if queuing on Elmore northbound extended from the always stop at Providence and began to impact or literally conflict with movements at University Lake Drive. That's the kind of queuing that we were looking for, to know whether or not we had, in fact, a problem that was truly a queuing problem. The analysis does not show queues developing at any of the study area intersections such that they would spill back and impact the operation of another study area intersection. So we're confident of those facts as based in the analysis of the TIA.
Okay. My next question kind of comes back, Terry, to your lead-in to your presentation on the level of detail and the site plans that we've received. And I was looking at what we received, and I was disappointed. I was hoping to get a little more detail and have a little more information to make this evaluation on. I also went back to the code to review what the code provides as guidance for submittal, and it provides almost nothing in submittal. It is a concept level, but, the site plan we were provided, what I like to refer to as the cartoon, is not to scale. I couldn't even figure out what scale it was. And so I was a little frustrated by that, to try to do some analyzing it and trying to make some decisions. And the first thing that came to my mind in reviewing this was you must have had something in mind when you sized the buffer between the parking lot and Elmore Drive. And, at the minimum width there on your site plan, what is that dimension?
The fact is that what we were trying to do is just preserve some area. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what that minimum width is. I could get that fairly quickly probably, but I don't know it off of the top of my head. If I had to guess, it's about 30 feet as a minimum width.
So we're looking at a 30-foot minimum width.
And
That's
I
one of
say
the
that now,
important
the
things to
planet-
me is what kind of buffer are we maintaining along there. And I don't. One of the things about a concept site plan is we can review it, especially with the landscape, and give you feedback. So when you bring back the final, we don't have a redo.
I think what you'll find is that the final, obviously this is a concept, but the final will have some differences, obviously. There'll even be some gaps along the Elmore Road side of it that had to happen as a result of some other utility issues that have come up. But that's what happens between concept and final. I mean, there's no way to accurately anticipate all of the things as you proceed through a design. And that's why we come back for a final design, a final landscape design.
I guess it was kind of my hope that the concept would be more developed than what we have. I look at this as a 10 to 15% design, and I would have expected to get something in the 35 to 50% design. So I'm disappointed with the level of detail, and it makes it difficult to do the review, is my observations. And although we haven't had a lot of experience with site plan approvals on this board, we have tons of experience with concept landscape plans.
You do.
And to my experience on this board, I have never been provided a cartoon and then a list of plants. We've always had outlines of what the landscape will look like, what the beds are, make some judgments about the bed widths, whether they're sufficient to support the plantings that you're supporting. And so I guess I will just share with you my disappointment at the level of detail for the concept site plan, for the landscape portion, and the information we were given there. And I guess I'll get off my horse for a while and turn it over to other board members. Mr. Dinwiddie?
I have a few questions. How many students live within walking distance, UAA students?
I would turn that one over to a representative from UAA if I could, perhaps.
Yes, in UAA housing, there's 1,000.
Please come forward and state your name for the record, please. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name's Chris Terlides, Associate Vice Chancellor for Facilities at UAA. Thanks for hearing us tonight. To answer the question, there are roughly 1,000 beds in UAA housing that we own and operate. more students live in the immediate area and rental properties.
And what's the current average attendance to a basketball game?
Oh.
Regular season.
Yeah, so our sports arena holds 1,000. The women's game tomorrow night will probably have 1,000 and change in it, but usually we're in the 800 range.
And lately, what's the attendance at Sullivan Arena for UA hockey games?
So I don't know specifically what the count is.
Roughly $3,000.
Yeah,
maybe.
so I'd say 3,000.
Yeah, so that's kind of, that brings in perspective that, there may be a event or two that could overmax and require special traffic, but in the vast majority, 75-80% of the events at this are not going to tap this parking that you have here out. That it's a relative, if you guys wanted to have the shootout there, you might have some issues, but other than the shootout type event or divisional playoffs in hockey, those kind of events might, but for the vast majority of your regular season, kids walking from the dorms, parking at UAA, parking over at the library, I mean, this is generally feeling it's going to work.
Yes.
Second question is more of a design question. Terry, on the roundabout, is it going to be a drive-over apron similar to, because there's about 4 different styles of roundabouts for DOT in town, and some are really not so grand, and some are pretty good. Will there be an oversized drive apron because there's lots of bus traffic? How wide will that apron be in addition to the 2 lanes that you show on the plan?
Love to answer that question, but there are a bunch of decisions that haven't been made yet. So we'll be going to the DOT asking what design standards they want applied for this intersection if it's to be treated as a roundabout, which is what we're proposing. But those decisions have yet to be made. Some of those discussions haven't even been begun yet.
And how many acres do you have to clear before the bird window?
Pardon me?
How many acres do you have to clear before the bird window to get this project off the ground?
We have to be moving pretty quickly on it in the spring, in other words, to meet the bird window for the clearing.
Do you have an idea how many acres?
Well, altogether, it's the entire site is a little over 16. We probably have 10, 12 acres that we've got to address.
Okay.
10 to 13.
Okay. That's pretty much all the questions I have. Thanks.
Mr. Pratt?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, let me say I really appreciate your attempts to have shared infrastructure in the city. I think that's good. It's good for the community. It's good for the long-term assets of both the university and there's probably some benefits into it for Providence. I'm glad you could find something that apparently works in terms of their business and doesn't impede their business. And I don't know if it helps their business. It may with these additional infrastructure improvements. One question I have on the back to the traffic queuing. I'm not a traffic engineer, but when you run your studies, do you stress test those models? For example, let's say that Fiddler on the Roof is playing at Wendy Williamson. You've got Duke University is playing at the Sports Center. You've got maybe something else going on at the hockey ring. Is that how you build those up? To just say, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen, and then tell me what happens at 36th and Lake Otis, and et cetera, et cetera.
We do what's generally referred to as a reasonable worst-case scenario. So what met that test or that definition was a 5,600 capacity seat event occurring at 7 p.m. on a weekday evening based on the traffic volumes that were measured in the study area on that kind of a weekday evening. Now, what I can't tell you with any certainty is when we collected the traffic counts, were all of those other things happening. The traffic counts are supposed to represent typical conditions on which then we do our analysis or supposition of scenarios. So again, for us, it's the traffic that's measured in reality, in other words, and then added in that special major capacity event on a weekday evening. And that analysis showed that the system works well, meets the standards of the MOA and the DOT, and in fact works better because of the improvements that are proposed as a net outcome.
But emergencies in terms of like impeding emergency vehicles access and everything, those aren't going to occur on your average day.
Well, I want to make sure I understand your point. So an emergency vehicle needs to gain access to the emergency room at the medical center.
Right.
And none of us can predict when that's needed. And so it's important that we make sure that there's a system in place that gives them access as quickly as possible. That's why they're equipped with flashing lights. And that's why the law dictates that when a vehicle like that is using those lights, as motorists and pedestrians, we're supposed to move out of the way. Under the premise that everyone is obeying the law, then that vehicle is given as quick an access to the necessary facilities as humanly possible. But everything hinges on human beings. So to tie that back to your point, admittedly, we don't study the worst of the worst cases, sometimes referred to as the Easter Sunday of conditions, because it only happens once a year. It sometimes happens at an unpredictable time, and it's nearly impossible to size a transportation system to accommodate that rare, unexpected event. So we simply don't do it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Ms. Ferguson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just wanted to follow up on something that you had said earlier, that you were looking for something in the code to address the site plan. And I just wanted to let you and the commissioners know that in the code we do have a section that deals with definitions, and there is a definition for site plan and what's expected to be submitted for a site plan. And I'll read that. It says site plan means a plan prepared to scale, showing accurately and with complete dimensioning the boundaries of a site and the location of all uses and structures proposed for one or more parcels of land as required by this title and the regulations involved. And there was one other thing I wanted to mention, is that the UDC has been reviewing and approving site plans for quite so many years now, since 2008. So it's not been anything recent. We've been doing this, the Commission's been doing this now for 4 years now. And,
That's recent to me.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all I had.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, follow up with the site plan.
I had a question in regards to the concept landscape plan. Is there a standard for that as well?
There isn't anything in the code that talks about either concept site plan or final site plan or concept landscape plan or final landscape plan. But we do use these terms, but there's nothing in code that defines, what makes up a concept plan versus a final plan.
Ms. Abel?
Yeah, could you address the old issue of drainage and storm runoff? I was a little confused about the dialogue about that.
That is actually a very good question. I have with me tonight Don Porter from R&M Engineers, and I think that he can address that.
Yes, my name is Don Porter with R&M Consultants. I'm the civil design lead. So the entire intent is essentially to bring the drainage through a series of shallow ditches, swales, vegetated swales, bring it from the south end of the parking lot, bring it underneath through a culvert, and bring it north to the open area that's a natural detention basin, essentially. The detention basin is about elevation bottom, elevation 154. The parking lot will range from 160 to say 165 in some areas. So we have plenty of elevation to create the drainage that we need to do. We will also, there's a storm drain system along Providence, and at the very northern east corner of Elmore and Providence, there is a catch basin that we will use as an overflow structure. So in the 10-year event, it may not even hit that as the detention basin, and the rest will infiltrate into the gravels below. There's a significant water table that's moving through the area that's very shallow, 14 feet down, let's say. So we have good access to groundwater. We have good access to movement of groundwater. We fully expect that that will be a reasonable solution, and with an overflow for the detention retention. So does that answer your question at all?
It kind of does. I just, I kind of tend to like natural wooded areas. When I see clear cutting, opening up the forest, low down, water running in, snow removal being dumped up against the forest, I just have some concerns that those natural areas are not going to stay shown on our site plan.
Yeah, I would like to point out that we are retaining as much natural vegetation as possible, and actually that natural vegetation that is there is already used to this sort of cyclic event where it rains, it holds in that area for a while, and then it drains off. So this is nothing new to the vegetation that's already there. It's already well established, and it understands that cycle.
Thank you.
I guess I have a follow-up to that, Mr. Porter. You know, on our site plan, you know, there's a notation, proposed natural detention area.
Yes.
And I guess my concern is we're going to flood that area and kill the vegetation. And so...
It kind of goes back to what I was saying, is that it naturally does that already. It's 154, and it's the low spot on the site, and it naturally drains to that site already. So it has no outlet whatsoever, and it drains away all the time. That entire site does that already.
But won't the water increase with this 500 space parking area draining into that area? Won't there be substantially more water?
It will be more, and you know that you're right, but that's why we're also adding in the detention swales to increase the amount of surface area that's available for input and infiltration. So we're using low drainage, low slope detention swales. So they'll be part of that system. And, yeah.
So we won't have the Don Porter dead forest?
I can't predict the world, but we don't anticipate that to be the case.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Dinwiddie?
Well, I guess I would disagree with you on that, and particularly because of what you had just said. The whole entire site is permeable soils. It's basically good gravel. So you're taking 500 spaces of good gravel and you're basically creating an impermeable surface, and then you're rerouting that into some birch and generally deciduous tree area, and you're expecting it to do, it's going to kill every leaf tree in the spot, regardless of whether it doesn't. The reason why it doesn't do it now is because you have 500 spaces of space that basically perks. The ground perks right away. There's probably a ton of gravel in this whole entire neighborhood. And if you're going to create impermeable asphalt in there and then drain it into some drainage swales and then route it basically to an area of leafy trees, that's going to fill up with water. And no matter on even maybe a 1 year event, rain event, the amount of water going into that leafy tree area is going to create a swamp, and then unless they're black spruce or some kind of swamp type tree, that whole entire birch forest is going to basically start to die off one at a time.
Well, it's birch, cottonwood, and spruce, and if you check the permeability calculations, we anticipate the 1 year event to completely perk within, 48 hours.
Okey-doke.
Don, maybe I can
Go ahead.
dive in, only because I worked on some of the site plan portions of Providence Hospital, which also has a lot of very gravelly soils. And in fact, we did make drainage basins there, and they have never held virtually any water. I mean, water comes into that and it perks, and it happens very, very quickly, and I think that'll happen here. I think one of the things that we tend to do, even with biofiltration swales, is we have this tendency to make them lawn areas that get manicured, and then they don't perk very well. right now we show it as a lawn area. We're proposing to put shrubs and some other things in those, into the biofiltration swells that are shown in the parking lot. In actuality, in my experience, biofiltrations work a lot better if you actually have materials in them that'll filter out materials, and there's a lot of plants that'll do okay with that. So it also helps to speed the process up to some degree. And I think that we're also showing an area that is adjacent to the parking lot that has biofiltration, infiltration areas before it ever goes off into the trees. There is some risk in this. I don't disagree. I think one of the things, again at a concept level, it was not clear to us that we could use any storm drain on Providence Drive without a detailed analysis. I'm sure some members of the commission are familiar with what has to go into that to determine that you can or cannot add any water to those. But the fact is there is some capacity there. That we know that now. We didn't know that at the time, and I think things like roof drains and some other things we'll be able to accommodate with that to reduce some of that load. But there will be a fair bit on site. We have a great high infiltrating site, and I feel reasonably confident that that'll work.
I have one last follow-up. Oh, go ahead, Don. Has there been any consideration to traffic on 40th and Dale? 40th has been improved from Lake Otis to Piper, so people are going to come from any direction which they can. And the residents along from Piper to Dale Street, there's residential housing on the backside. And when that construction project went in for 40th Avenue, there was a lot of stress on those people. Is there any consideration for how to address that parking along there and people walking from there and those kind of considerations for those people right there?
I've got maybe a 2 or 3 part answer to your question. So first, to go back to the traffic impact study, we knew that these projects were coming. They weren't fully built and fully operational at the time we started the analysis. So we relied on the MOA's travel demand model, which I suspect you're familiar with, to first educate ourselves as to once these improvements were in place, how would the traffic redistribute itself based on the new facilities that would be in place. So the impact analysis for the site development was aware that these facilities were coming and would be in place prior to development. And so background traffic, as I refer to it, was redistributed to that new system based on the MOA's travel demand model. I think that's part of an answer to your question. Then as it relates to impacts to the local neighborhoods that are along some of these streets, we were careful in our assignment of our site-generated traffic to assign that traffic to roadways that met 2 criteria. 1, is it the right road for the traffic to be on? And 2, would a typical motorist choose to go in the shortest path, either literally the shortest point between A and B in distance or in time? That took care of the majority of the traffic from the site in terms of assignment. Now, there were low-volume roadways that are low speed that do go through neighborhoods, and those were the ones we were most concerned about because it's not an impact that the university wants to have on its adjacent neighborhoods. And so we evaluated whether or not traffic was in fact going to be attracted to places like that. And what we found in general is that because of the low speeds of the facilities, how certain intersections were controlled typically by stop signs, that the combination of those 2 factors would cause the traffic to go to the other streets that really are meant to carry that traffic. There are higher speed facilities. They're controlled with traffic control devices that give the motorist the right of way to make the movements more quickly and efficiently. So that led to the conclusions that there may be some traffic that goes into the neighborhoods, but primarily it's going to be traffic that came from the neighborhood and went to the event.
Any further questions, Mr. Dinwiddie? Mr. Garcia?
I guess my first question I'll start off with is the snow retention area. So, I mean, I know these drawings weren't provided to scale, and I read somewhere in one of these couple hundred pages we read that they're planning on hauling off snow once the snow retention area is full. Based on just looking at the size of the parking lot, it doesn't even seem they'll be able to plow once. So I'm sort of questioning the snow retention concept as a whole. And is this actually representative of what's going to really happen, or is there a plan that they're just going to haul the snow every time it snows?
The plan is not to haul snow every time it snows, and in fact, the parking lot was specifically designed in that long linear fashion, so snow could be pushed down the length of that and across to the other side of the roadway that you see toward the bottom of the screen at the top. But the intent is that these are designed so that they don't have planter islands in them, so that they can push the snow all the way down and move that off into that cleared area that's adjacent there. This year would be a challenge.
Yeah, I think it would fail. Or it would have failed probably before January.
Again, this is Don Porter. Andrew, the typical rationale that they use is they look for event timing. And so during the times that they're going to have low events, they're going to store it on the parking surface. If they know they're having a big event coming along, then they are going to remove it at that point in time. Essentially, the boundaries of each of the parking areas will have somewhat up to a 30-foot buffer that they'll be pushing snow into, very similar to what they do now at the current sports area. You can see that they pile it at the ends as high as they can get it, and then at some point in time, yes, you're right, they'll have to move it off, and that's what they'll do. But they will also time it based on large events. So if they don't have a large event coming for another month, they might just go ahead and leave it on the surface of the parking area, give themselves times to plan and do what they need to do. I don't know if that helps, but...
It does, because it actually leads into my second question I was going to ask, which is, when I read this, they said there was only going to be approximately 10 major events. And maybe this is a better question for UAA facilities, but I was curious what the 10 events were, when they happened, what season they happened in, and are we talking, is basketball considered a major event? Is hockey going to be taking place here? Is that considered a major event? What are these 10 or less major events that I read about?
Great question. Glad you asked. We've got a picture that we'll show. I'll let Chris start, and then I'll fill in any blanks that remain. So I'll show you something out of the traffic impact study that's based on information that was developed with the university about these expected events. So bear with me just a moment.
So let me address your question about hockey first. First, there is no hockey associated with this facility. It's a 5,000-seat gymnasium is the largest capacity. There's a couple alternate gymnasiums, some recreational space, practice space for the varsity teams of the various sports. So we expect that that the peak events, I think you can see on the screen now, it will be UAA graduation. That's a April, end of April, a May event, depending on the year. There's a few concerts that are scattered between August and April. There's probably, in the lower tier, there's statewide basketball tournaments, championships of junior or native Olympic sports, those types of things. We show our basketball not being at peak, but pushing 3,000 when everybody's winning. I think the chart pretty well displays it. So we see some concerts, we see graduations, we see if the shootout moves back to our arena, that would push it. And again, that's Thanksgiving time, generally speaking. So those are the events. That's the graphic that kind of shows what we think the rhythm will be. And that's probably not the first year. That's probably as we mature into the facility.
Okay, so we're basically talking about an event once, twice a week. that would basically be 2,000 or less, and then probably, 3,000 or so more would be like once a month to twice a month. Is that pretty?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good interpretation of what the arena or what the sports folks expect and the users of the arena expect.
Okay.
And again, it's used daily for recreation, training for the sports team. That's where our athletics department will be located. So it'll be used every day. It's not an arena like the Sullivan Arena. It is used every day by student, staff, and faculty for recreation and sports training.
Okay. My next question is, we keep talking concept here. Like this is concept, landscape, concept site. The plans were submitted in October. This facility is supposed to be done in 2014, I believe. So are we really at a concept? Is this as far as you guys are along? Okay, so there's really additional information that you could have provided us this evening in regards to like what the landscape's going to actually be like. We just elected not to move forward and update the information.
Well, the problem that I've run into before is the problem of having multiple plans. We came back to you in December, but there was no quorum. And we could have submitted plans at that time. So then it would be put off again. And then there's another set of plans. And this has happened on more than one project. So the cost of putting these packages together is expensive. Secondly, you then are subjected to having this whole range of plans that are out there in the public. And we have to come back for final. We have plans now that are very well developed. They're virtually at 95% now. And we're going to bring those back to you shortly. And I apologize that. I apologize for the level of this, but quite honestly, I submitted this to the planning department in Ms. Ferguson's absence, asking the question, is this going to be acceptable at this level? And I got a response back that it would be, and I have a memorandum for record that states that. So this is not the plan level that I prefer to submit at this point, but one of the things I would suggest is that at this level, to provide complete dimension drawings at that concept level that you know will have to be completely redone as you go forward doesn't make a great deal of economic sense. And so on the one hand, I apologize that you're getting them at this stage. At the other hand, what we provided is a concept drawing.
I understand that. My problem more so is with the landscape plan because you're not identifying tree species and laying them out, and there's people who sit on this commission who have years of experience and have contributed to multiple designers in positive ways at the concept so that when the final came back they were able to implement some of those recommendations or acknowledge potential errors that they may have had. And that's really the
I think I acknowledge that as well. I think in looking at the plant selection list, I don't think there's anything that's really out of line for this particular location. I don't think there's anything that's a risky plant that's in there at this point. I understand the desire to see them in the right place and clearly identified. I would love to have provided that.
Okay. And I guess my next question is actually for the architect. And I'm not trying to spin off too much, but I'm actually here. I just had a question on the building choice. So, and not necessarily, just basically color selection, because we're talking about an arena that's going to be in the winter in Alaska, used primarily, and it's white. And so I actually heard someone refer to it once as the great white elephant of UAA. So I was just sort of curious as to why we're using such a color selection.
Sure. By the way, for the record, my name is Michael Carlson. I'm with McCool Carlson Green Architects. The building won't actually be white, but we are focusing for reasons of sustainability and longevity on materials that are natural. And the materials we're looking at are zinc and stainless steel and aluminum. Metal skin makes sense for this building. And If all goes well in terms of our budget, we're hoping the zinc will have a very nice, interesting patina to it when we start out, and not have to develop it over time. That's why the renderings you've seen are the color palette doesn't have any bright colors, because bright colors mean painted finishes, which paint's great, but 25, 30 years out, it's gonna not look so great. And so we're looking for materials. This whole building we're looking at in terms of a facility that's going to be useful and easily maintained for 100 years, and that's our goal anyway. And we'll see how close we get to it. But that's the reason that the material palette on the exterior doesn't have any real bright colors to it. But kind of addressing that issue in terms of its liveliness in the wintertime. One of the very interesting things about this arena compared to almost any arena you've probably ever seen is the transparency that we have. The natural light not only coming into the building, but so much of the events will happen at night, and the light coming out of the building, the transparency, your ability to see in, not just to the lobby, but into the arena itself, and see that kind of activity and that life of the building is, I think, much more responsive to our need for lively buildings in the wintertime than any particular color choices that we might make. So it is something we've thought a lot about, both inside and outside the building.
Thank you for your input. That's all I really have at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ferguson?
Yes. I had a question for the gentleman in the front row. I'm sorry, didn't catch your name earlier.
Which, the traffic or the...
The man that's going to...
I'm Phil Worth.
Phil Worth. Yes, when you began speaking tonight about the roadway facilities, you began by saying, when we design the facilities. And I was struck by that because it begs the question how you would imagine that the planning division could recommend for approval or the commission could approve the roadway facilities when, by your own admission, they haven't been designed yet. Could you elaborate on that? You began by saying when we design the facilities, we'll make sure that they're designed to DOT and MOA standards or specifications. And so, but that section, when we design the facilities, I was struck by that.
I'm sorry to introduce confusion on an opening statement. There's certainly nothing hidden behind what I was saying. There's not final construction design documents for the roadways or any of the transportation facilities yet. There's nothing that's been designed to the 100th of a foot related to any of this.
Could you say what % completion you're at now on the roadways?
Can I address that? Sure. I think you kind of have to look at it from another perspective, which is, we're looking at multi-lane roadways that are surrounding the site. And so what Phil's working with is, if you were given carte blanche with a blank slate, you would design the entire system. Well, that didn't happen. Now you're actually set with roadways that are around the system that are already constructed. And they are constructed to anticipated levels of service even in the future. So just as ARDSA works for the entire system in a lot of ways, they look to the future and they say, well, we're going to have to make it this big. Maybe it's not this big right now, but that's what's going to happen to the system. UMed is much that way. So the multi-lane roadways that you see are there to support the development that may come. And so they all work together in a larger system. Does that help?
Yes, it does in terms of the multi-lane roads, but I guess my question also includes, for instance, Wellness Drive. Is that designed yet, or what % completion is that road at?
Wellness Drive was actually expanded with the cooperation of UAA and Providence in anticipation of this project. So if you look at Wellness Street, which is it actually is named, it was developed into a 3-lane 111 configuration to develop more capacity.
I should probably stop you at this point. It was my mistake. I meant to say Health Drive.
Okay, Health Drive is a single-lane roadway and in both ways, and it has left turn pockets into the site. And there again, that's the same capacity as wellness. And it also allows metering of the facility such that when they come out, they don't come out wholesale 2 lanes wide. They come out and they meter out into the larger roadway system so that, you talked about queuing earlier. And one of the things you're going to find out is the queuing is all going to occur, let's say, in the roundabout. They're trying to go left. Well, there's only one lane that can go left into the site from Elmore into the site during a loading event, let's say. Well, if you have to imagine that if there was, say, ambulance or something like that wants to come to Providence Hospital, there's a multi-lane roadway there that says, okay, everybody, there's enough room for you to move over, people get out of the way, and it will come around, go around those people that are trying to turn left into the facility. So that's the whole purpose of the larger roadway systems.
Could
Anyway, Phil
you
can
say
kind of
what
fill in.
completion the health drive is at right at this point? And also the Elmore Road, that portion where the roundabout is.
We'll get right to the point. I would estimate with my architecture and engineering friends here that we're probably in the 65 to 85% design range for that facility. Things are pretty well pinned down, but not precisely pinned down.
Okay.
And when you talk about percentage, really, the width and the number of lanes is very definitely pinned down. When you're now talking about the 85 to 100% range, now you're just talking about the vertical portion and the details of where the pedestrian crossings are, where the grading, the small details. The larger details of what you see on the plan is exactly how it's designed. In plan view, it's there, it's 3 lanes wide, and that's what it is.
Thank you.
And as a follow-up to that, everything I was reading is we don't know if it'll be a roundabout or a conventional intersection. Do you know now?
That's a decision that's to be made by the DOT in consultation with the MOA.
So that is a 0% complete design at this point because you don't have a decision?
That's right. Certainly we have a concept, and I might call that
for a conventional intersection in front of us. So there's no way for us to approve that intersection tonight because you don't know what you're building.
Sure.
Our intent is the roundabout. DOT has been supportive of that. MOA has been supportive of that. There's no thought in our mind or any indication from any of the agencies that we are going to be asked to regress to a signalized intersection. So we definitely are asking you to approve the roundabout design tonight. That's important for us because we need to proceed with the design. So apologize for the confusion. Phil's the traffic engineer. He modeled it both ways, and there were kind of questions about it. But we've had indications from all the agencies that a roundabout is supported. So that's how we're proceeding.
Mr. Tybor.
Yes, thank you. I just had one question, a traffic-related question. When we look at event sizes, you got a scale up there, and so say a 3,000 a high school basketball event with 3,000 attendees. What sort of vehicle traffic do you estimate out of an event like that? Is there a ratio, one vehicle for 3 people? I just kind of want to get an idea of what does 3,000 attendees drive?
Yeah, so there'd be 2 important numbers to share with you. And the first is how many people do we expect in the average vehicle? And the number we're using for estimation purposes is 2.3. The other question, or the other figure to give you is what percentage of people who come to the event actually don't come in an automobile? They walk, take transit, or something other than an automobile. For the purposes of the arena, we assumed 15% of attendees or people in the building arrived by some means other than in an automobile. Maybe they rode the shuttle, maybe they walked from campus housing, maybe they were a staff member that was already on campus and came to the event. Maybe there's somebody from Providence who walks across the street. Okay?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else.
Nothing else. Mr. Dinwiddie?
I have a couple questions for Terry real quick. How many bike racks are you going to have?
Quite a lot, actually. Right now, we haven't made a final decision on whether there'll be a bicycle shelter, but there will be bike racks of a considerable number. I don't recall a number right off the top of my head.
A healthy number. I imagine
Yes.
there'd be lots of.
It isn't a minor thing.
Around the deciduous trees around the arena themselves, are you thinking big-headed shade trees or columnar trees? What are you thinking there? Or have you made that decision?
The decision isn't totally final yet. I think actually we do have a plan at this point that we're going to be submitting for in the coming week, actually, for your review down the road here. But I don't recall the species that we've got selected for that right off the top of my head. I actually think it is amber choke cherries.
That's all I had. I was more curious than anything.
Mr. Garcia?
Unfortunately, I have another traffic question. I know we've talked about, and it's going to progress from traffic, but it's stemmed from traffic. So we've talked about people parking at Providence and the Providence UA agreement. My question is, how are you going to communicate that to the public? Because I personally would be like, the hospital parking is for hospital people and emergency people, and even though it's after their standard hours, it is a 24-hour facility, so is, a person who might attend an event there, I wouldn't know to park there. So I'm just curious how we're going to communicate that to the public.
You bet. Great question. Admittedly, we're borrowing a bit from what we've learned at other universities and other major hosts of major events like this. So what, for example, we find is often in the way that we sell the ticket, we sell not only the ticket for the seat in the arena, but the ticket for where you park your vehicle. So we may designate different parking areas, either by the package that you buy for attending the athletic events, or if it's a special event like graduation, we may assign a parking area to you based on something that we use to differentiate one group from another, so that with the ticket that they receive, they're given direction as to where to park. That's probably the strongest example for how you manage a parking system for an event venue like this, where you're fundamentally trying to distribute the demand to the places where you want it to occur. And it's most easily handled by providing access to the parking based on the kind of ticket that they're buying. Does that make sense?
It sort of makes sense, except for, I believe those Providence garages have you have to pay for parking there. Is that not true anymore? Is that, okay.
They're all free.
So they're all free? Okay. Because that posed my other question regarded to that. But okay, so you're going to market the parking based on the ticket and probably based on how good your ticket is or how expensive, how much money you paid for your ticket.
Yeah.
You get the closer, better.
Yeah, and it's not the only strategy. It's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it's a proven effective strategy. We'll put it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Abel?
Yeah, it sounds like it might be too late, but I just wanted to make a comment about the plant palette that you put forward, the plant list. It's very safe, I give you that, but I don't try to go to Providence Hospital too often, but they have some really adventurous, some interesting landscape plantings next door, and this is old stuff. And I just suggest that maybe add a little bit more interesting. There's a lot of new plants that have come out in the last 10 or 15 years. These are all, except for a couple, are pretty old standard stock plants. That's just my 2 cents.
I think that we have the capacity to take a look at that at this point. UAA does take some experimental look at this, but we have been going back and forth actually with the UAA maintenance folks to take a look at the planning plan and what they would like to see in it as well. So they're the ones who have to maintain it, and we feel obligated to work with them on that. So
I just know Tony Aster. I mean, it's a good plant, but it's a moose magnet as well. It's something I don't think you really want to have in this kind of area. That's just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you. I had an additional question, and it was one that I asked for staff, is what's your understanding of the off-site improvements that will be required of this facility?
We'll go transportation first. How's that?
Good.
Okay. I'm going to work primarily from the site drawing that you see shown up here. By coming forward, I'll describe it as a proactive approach, developing a site plan that in fact had the Health Drive extension, new connection to Elmore, and other aspects that you see depicted here. What we had was a package of improvements that work well enough that the need for additional improvements dissipated to the point where, frankly, there are no additional requirements in place. So specifically what's happened is, first by disconnecting Sharon Gannon from Elmore, we remove from the system today an intersection that causes some consternation to the DOT. It's an intersection that has a crash history that they wish it didn't have. It's a connection that works, but doesn't work as well as anyone might like it to work. The university said, let's help solve that problem. We'll disconnect it. And instead, we'll take Sharon Gannon and connect it to this new roadway, Health Drive. Equally important, by creating the connection of health from wellness over to Elmore, once again, we've created some redundancy to the system. We're redundant now to a segment of Providence that has no redundancy right now between wellness and Elmore. And again, the analysis shows that by creating that parallel roadway, we in fact bring benefit not just to the users of the arena, but other users in the area, specifically Providence. They benefit directly, but even indirectly, APU. I don't expect APU to be driving on the Health Drive extension, but by taking traffic that today goes up Wellness, Providence, and then down Elmore, taking those off of that segment of Elmore, the University Lake Drive Elmore intersection works better.
Is Wellness Drive a public road or a private road?
It's a public road. It is owned by UAA, by Providence, and now through joint use agreement by UAA. If you look at the way it's been expanded.
Well, I think it was real short. Will it be constructed in a public use easement, or will it be on private property?
It's private. It's a privately maintained road.
Okay, so it's private road. It will never be turned over to the public for.
That is correct.
Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you. So now we can go back to keep going. I think it just comes back to, I'm looking for a list. One of the conditions is to construct everything that's on the traffic department's memo of approval and DOT's memo of approval. Oh. And I want to make sure I understand those. So you're going to build a pedestrian facility for the length of Elmore and the length of Providence. That's item one. Okay, are you going to construct a signalized intersection and or a roundabout, one of those options, whatever you end up with, at Wellness and Elmore?
Yes.
Is that a public improvement that this project will make?
Well, let me John, just a question about wellness. Right. And that's the signal.
No, that's the stop.
Wellness and Elmore.
Let me address that. The intersection is already constructed. It is a stop-controlled intersection, and that's what it will be. And it is, again, it's a private intersection. Wellness and health.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm at Health Drive. And
Elmore will be a controlled intersection, as you say, either signalized or a roundabout. That will all come through the memorandum of agreement, which is being constructed based on the mitigations that are stated within the traffic impact analysis approved by DOT.
Okay. So that is a public improvement that this project will build.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. And are those the public improvements that this project will build? Is that the list of them? The pedestrian facilities, disconnect the road, and the signalized intersection?
Phil, there's one other that hasn't been addressed. And there's one minor other offsite improvement, and that is on the north side of Providence Drive, in the parking lot that's adjacent to the consortium library, which is going to be one of the sources of parking for this facility, there's not now a pedestrian link that goes from that parking lot to the Providence Drive walkway. So there is a short length of sidewalk connection that'll happen between the consortium library parking lot and the north side pedestrian facility on Providence.
Okay. And is that requirement captured anywhere in these conditions of approval?
It is. It is not captured in these conditions of approval. It is identified on the on our zone on the variance request that we've got going in right now.
The ZEBA?
The ZEBA request.
Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
There is one other.
Yes.
The traffic impact analysis, one of the conditions of approval was that they set aside public use easement on Elmore and Providence for the future intersection that may or may not come. So that is also one of the stipulations of the TIA approval, and it will be in the memorandum of agreement with the DOT and MOA.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Ferguson?
Yes, I just wanted to elaborate more on the question that you had. If commissioners would turn to page 39 in the packet. If you look near the top of the page, it says new pedestrian connections supporting pedestrian traffic from north parking lots, and you'll see the arrow pointing to a dotted line. It looks like a little bit different color than the rest of the dotted lines. That's the sidewalk connection that Terry was just talking about.
Okay.
And then it's been identified that they may need to put in an additional an additional sidewalk, and that will be along the east side of the parking lot. We tried to determine from aerial photographs whether there was an existing sidewalk there, and it's kind of inconclusive whether there is one there or not, and now with all the snow, it's hard to determine it also. But the thought is that those people who park on the west side of the parking lot are not likely to walk to the east side of the parking lot to use that pedestrian walkway that's shown here. And so we're going to ask them, as part of the variance request, is to add a sidewalk along the west side of that parking lot to access, so that people who park there can get to that corner of that drive and Providence Drive to cross over Providence Drive.
And I guess my follow-up question to that, Sharon, would be, do we need an additional condition of approval that requires these improvements? How do we know that'll get done?
You can, if you like, put it as a condition here. I mean, redundancy wouldn't be a bad thing.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions of the applicant? Mr. Garcia.
I have one more for the architect. So when I was reading the design guidelines contained in the MOA University Med District Framework Master Plan and all the different things and what complies and doesn't comply, one of the items that stood out for me was that it says, orient buildings to create favorable microclimates for new and existing landscapes and to protect building entrances and usable outdoor spaces. And it said that this does not comply. Both the north and south building entrances appear to be exposed to the elements. There's no indication that favorable microclimates have been created to benefit plant materials. Is there any, I don't know, I guess it's sort of a combination between you and...
Oh, yeah. Well,
I was wondering...
I didn't really agree with that analysis. The main entrance to this facility is facing south. We've got an expansive south plaza there. It's going to create some favorable microclimates. As the architect, I wasn't particularly thinking about the plants. I was thinking more about the people. We've got some initiatives, depending on budget, to also create some covered areas for waiting, some seating areas, and some other things that would enhance that South Plaza. But I think it's going to be a very comfortable and enjoyable plaza. I think we'll find students hanging out there as well as serving the arena on the south side.
And another question I had, and it's not necessarily indicated on any drawings, nor does it necessarily have to be, but are these going to be heated sidewalks near the arena? And I'm more so concerned because of life safety and ice that builds up here in the winter and everything.
Yeah, we're definitely concerned about that as well, and we do have heated sidewalks as part of the plan on both sides of the facility. It's currently in the plan, it's currently in the budget, so it's a priority for the university for those reasons and for maintenance reasons, and just to keep our building looking clean. Again, we're thinking about this building as a 100-year building, and the more we can keep it from getting tracked up and dirty, the longer it'll retain its appearance and look good. So that's all part of our thinking right now.
Okay. And I think that was all I had.
Well, I appreciate somebody having questions for the architect.
The great white whale, I like that. Mr. Dinwiddie.
I have one last question. Wellness Drive has fully automated irrigation. It was installed when Providence finished Wellness last year on both sides of the road. It's sleeved the whole basically from Providence Drive to the end of South Parking Garage is fully automated with pop-ups along that trail there. Are you, is there any plans or is it in the budget to do any irrigation on your side?
Right now, the budget is allowing for a quick coupler system. The university does do a lot of on-site irrigation. There's a desire for an automated irrigation system, but it's currently not budgeted. As I say, there is a quick coupler system that is provided for irrigation to the remoter parts of the site.
Okay. Are there any other questions of the applicant? With that, I'd like to open the public hearing to, we're going to take a quick break before we open it to public testimony. So 10 minutes, and we'll be back.
Hi, my name's Jerry Hendrickson. I work for Providence Health and Human Services and the Real Estate and Development Division. We at Providence are interested in this project going forward. The only thing I wanted to present to the Commission for consideration is Providence has not entered into an agreement yet with UAA for the parking that has been presented tonight. There's been some discussions and stuff, but based on some of the narrative and some of the written material, I just wanted to clarify for the Commission's consideration and understanding that Providence hasn't yet fully engaged in that agreement yet. But we're interested in pursuing that, and that's something that we're still working on. I just wanted to clarify that. That's it. Yes, exactly. Right. And I guess I wasn't clear, again, just tonight listening and reading that was the full understanding. So, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, my name is Tim Potter with Dow HCAM. I'm here representing APU tonight. Just a couple of quick items. APU did have some concerns concerning traffic circulation and parking impacts. We have had multiple meetings now with UAA. They have responded very well, and we have a commitment from UAA that they will work with us to resolve our concerns and the issues that we brought up. And just to clarify, One additional point on the graphic that was up on the screen showing the site plan, the lead that comes from the roundabout over to the east going towards APU from the Health Elmore roundabout. On page 24, it suggests that there's a future connection, and that is what's being planned, but it doesn't appear that the improvements by and required as part of the roundabout go to the property line. I have checked with Mr. Turtolides, and he's assured me that it is their intent to go that far. So really, I believe the drawing that's carrying forward is the one that was depicted on the board that does show it coming all the way to the property line, the improvement. So with that, APU has a commitment from UAA to resolve the issues that we were concerned about, and we're here to support them tonight. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to testify? Is there anyone else wishing to testify? Hearing and seeing no one, we will close that portion, but we will provide an opportunity to the applicant for rebuttal. You were out of time. Is there an amount of rebuttal time that you would like to request?
Maximum 2 minutes. I think I can summarize very quickly.
Great. We'll give you 2 minutes for some rebuttal.
I thank you very much for your careful consideration of this. This is a very large project that will be going in Midtown Anchorage. I think it warrants the level of scrutiny that you're giving to it, and I greatly appreciate your time, and I believe UAA does as well as part of this project. So I think that there's an issue relative to the linking of the roads and the site, and I think that part of the issue with that is that both health and wellness are not on public property, are not on public right-of-ways per se, and in fact a public use easement may not happen at those locations. And we've always treated it as though those roads are part of the overall site for the UAA Sports Arena as a result of that. And the fact that they're not becoming public use easements is not because either UAA or Providence doesn't want them to become public use easements. It's because the municipality probably does not want to take those on, the responsibility for those roadways on. The fact is both UAA and Providence have the capacity to take care of and maintain those roadways very well, and they will long into the future. So the issue that they need to be addressed as a separate item, it didn't come to us in that sense because they are not, in fact, within public use easement or a public right-of-way. The Elmore Road piece of this, in my experience, DOT projects I don't believe come to the Urban Design Commission for approval. In my experience, DOT projects go through their own circuit, but I don't believe they actually come to you for roadway approvals. So the upgrades we're doing, we're coordinating very carefully. We're meeting all the requirements of the DOT. They're in design. You've brought up the issue that it could be a roundabout. It could be otherwise. We favor the roundabout, and we seek your approval on that in a sense, because I think that that'll help to calm traffic on Elmore Road, and I think that's the better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for the applicant? Apparently not. Thank you. With that, I will close the public hearing, and the matter rests with the board. And I need a brave soul to take on this motion. Mr. Tybor?
Yes. Mr. Commissioner, I move to approve case number 2011-141, final site plan review and concept landscape plan review for the University of Alaska Anchorage Sports Arena to include Health Drive, Elmore Road, Health Drive Roundabout and extension of Sharon Gagnon Lane, subject to staff's conditions on page 9, condition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, deleting condition 7, and the remainder of conditions 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 through condition 19.
Okay. And again, Mr. Tybor, it's your intention to use staff's conditions and not the substitute conditions that were suggested by the applicant?
That is my motion. I wouldn't be opposed to a friendly amendment to alter that. Okay.
Thank you. And it's been seconded by Mr. Pratt. Mr. Tybor, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think we've had a rigorous discussion today, and I know many of my questions were answered that were on my mind. I believe as far as findings, the project will further it conforms to title requirements of Title 2105, Policy 23, Policy 42, Policy 44. The project furthers the goals of the University of Alaska Anchorage Campus Facilities Master Plan updated 2009, and as well as furthering goals of the UMed plan. And I think I may have missed something in there as well, so if I did, I apologize.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tybor. And I guess before I ask Mr. Pratt for some additional comments, there's one issue that I would like to get clarified as part of this motion is, are we including the off-site road improvements in this approval, or is that something that the board would like to exclude from this approval? As staff stated, it was unclear to them whether those improvements were required. The applicant specifically requested that those do be included tonight in the approval, and so I'd like to have some discussion from the board on whether they feel comfortable with that being included or they want to specifically exclude that from the approval tonight. Is there any discussion on that issue? Mr. Dinwiddie?
I would suggest that we include it. It's a critical part of the entire site plan, and it's the driver on it is the DOT. The DOT's pretty good at building roundabouts. They're pretty good at enhancement. If you look at Huffman Road, where we pretty much stay, they've done 3 roundabouts in one summer, and the landscape improvements were just fine down there. I think we should go ahead and include it and get this done in one shot.
I think it's a clarification of the motion that it is included. We may get corrected by our secretary to make that more formal, but let's continue the discussion for now. And is there Mr. Garcia?
I would recommend that we have 2 separate motions, and one for the site and one for the lacking the word right now that I'm
off-site.
Off-site, thank you. That way we can discuss both of them, and people won't feel constrained by their desire to approve one and feel an all or nothing. I don't know if that's acceptable to everyone to have 2 separate motions, but that's what I'd.
No, that's absolutely fine if that's how the board wants to go. I just want to make sure that it's clear what's included and what's not included.
And then the second item I wanted to discuss is the proposed design team's consolidation. I'm personally not for consolidating items 8 through 14. I sort of prefer how staff has laid them out, with the exception of modifying number 11 to be one roundabout, since it's only one and we're not discussing two. But that's my personal preference for this. I'll leave that up for discussion from the rest of the board.
Okay. Is there additional discussion on whether the off-site road improvements will be included in the motion or a separate motion for those? Any additional opinions from board members? Mr. Tybor?
Yes, I'd be happy to keep my motion limited just to the plan, and then we can have a separate motion for the off-site road improvements.
Okay. So we'll go forward with the motion as stated, and it's your opinion your motion as stated does not include the off-site road improvements?
Yes, that's my intent.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm good with that. So with that understanding of the motion we have on the floor, which is for the site design itself, and we have the conditions of staff as stated. Mr. Pratt, would you like to speak to the motion?
Sure. It appears to me that the motion is supported by the staff report, and its approval is also supported by testimony. I didn't hear anybody testify against approval of the site plan.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask staff what their opinion is of the consolidation of the conditions, whether they think any of those, there's a potential for any of those conditions to not be subsumed under the provision that was proposed by applicant?
Sure, I have no objection to asking staff's opinion on this. Ms. Ferguson, do you have an opinion on the substitutes that the petitioner has requested?
Through the chair, Mr. Pratt, it would be my preference to just leave it as it is, as staff conditions had written it. It's kind of a lot to try and take in and be able to evaluate here tonight whether or not those cover, what we had done earlier. So it would be my preference to just stay with staff conditions as they were written.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Pratt, do you have any additional discussion?
No, I assume that staff agrees that the one roundabout modification is acceptable.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Nope, that's it.
I guess, as far as some I guess I'll jump up at this point. In my review of the case and the conditions, first of all, I think that the UAA is brought forward a great project. I think they've done a great job on the building design. I would echo Mr. Garcia's comments that I'm not real impressed with your color selection, but I'm not an architect, so. I would like to see some more vibrant colors, but I think the architectural design, the building itself is they've done a great job. I think the site design itself is well thought out. I think Health Drive is going to be a great link to the transportation system and provide some definite improvements. I still have some concerns at peak events of the traffic congestion in the area. In my review of the conditions of approval that staff has recommended, my notes was to delete conditions 8 through 13. I don't think they're needed. And I don't think some of them are appropriate. They just aren't. I don't think we should reduce the speed limits. I think they're perfectly capable of dealing with the signing. I basically fully support the applicant's modification to delete all those conditions and substitute a new condition. I considered condition number 13 that was, trying to steer them more towards a grade separation crossing at the roundabouts. But I have no issue with pedestrian crossings at roundabouts. They work just fine. People do well. I think there's a lot of concern in the community that's unfounded. So I don't have any objection to those changes that they're recommending. And it's difficult as a chairman, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, is to make a motion to amend. And then I'm going to hand the gavel to somebody, and I'm going to do it anyway, Madam Secretary. Yeah. Well, I would like to encourage someone to make a motion to delete conditions number 8 through 16 and substitute the petitioner's substitute with add number 7 on their handout. But
Mr. Chair, did you mean, first you said 8 through 13, the second time you said 8 through 16?
8 through 13 is my intent. Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Ferguson. Mr. Dinwiddie?
I concur, Jim. I would like to present a motion that we eliminate conditions 8 through 13 and replace it with new condition number 7, roadway designs for all roadway in the project to include lane widths, turning radii, pedestrian facilities, lighting, and control devices shall be in conformance with Alaska DOT pre-construction manual for roadway design and MOA design criteria.
We have a motion. I need a second for that. Mr. Gasek, thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion, Mr. Dinwiddie?
Yeah, I concur with, I think that the DOT pre-construction manual and the MOA design criteria memo are quite thorough in how they identify and eliminate 9, 10, 11, and probably even address 12 and 13 as well. And I think it's a redundancy for us to place those conditions additionally on something that's already going to get done.
Thank you, Mr. Dinwiddie. Mr. Gasek, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I agree with the overall recommendation. I think when I was reading these earlier tonight, I thought there was a lot of redundancy in the recommendations. However, I'm going to also throw up an amendment to the amendment.
Well, let's do the amendment
Okay.
first, then we'll come back, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Is there objection to the amendment?
Can I have a point of clarification?
Mr. Pratt?
Is there a reason, for the same reasons that were described by the maker in the second of the motion, why 14 isn't just as redundant?
I'll speak to that. I think 14 is one of the questions that I had asked earlier. There's several different roundabouts in the city, and if you don't have a radius this is a bus-heavy zone, and for someone who also has trucks that are 40-foot long, roundabouts and 40-foot vehicles, I think it's important that you make sure you give them room. Otherwise, what typically happens is the driver of a 40-foot vehicle will take both lanes, and there's blind spots. I think it's important that we include the 14.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Is there I was just reading number 7, what we're replacing those with, and it specifically says that the design for roadways shall include turning radii, that is in conformance with DOT manual for roadway design and the MOA design criteria. Are we saying that DOT and MOA, whatever their criteria are not sufficient to accommodate normal traffic patterns? So we're going to modify that?
I would guess I'll jump in here. I would agree that 14 is a little redundant, that it would be covered under the new substitute, but I'm also not as offended by that extra reinforcement that we need to accommodate buses.
I'm just wondering if we're not happy with the way that the regs are now.
The regs will accommodate buses.
We can leave it at that.
Mr. Garcia. Discussion on the amendment.
Yeah. So I can see where the board's coming from. I can understand their point of view. However, I'd like to add that I am in favor of number 13 remaining. I'll state that. I am definitely a fan of the tunnels from a bike/ski commuter. I'm not necessarily prone to omitting 13. So,
are you going to make an amendment to our amendment, Mr. Garcia?
I guess I am, because I'm not going to approve it or vote to approve it by omitting 13. So I'd like to amend it by, what's up, Joe?
Okay, so what you need to do is vote on the amendment, and then once that's approved or denied, make a second amendment that would delete.
That would add 13 back in?
13 back in, or whatever change Mr. Gasek had, that would be an amendment as well. We'll just have to take them one at a time and then move back to the main motion as amended by any amendments, but one at a time.
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Thank you. Mr. Tybor, discussion on the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I just wanted to speak in support of Commissioner Dinwiddie's amendment. I intend to support it, and I do think it's, my personal opinion on roundabouts, from having, driven roundabouts here in town and driven roundabouts internationally, is we've kind of gotten our roundabouts wrong here. The little bitty roundabouts don't work, and so I think it's important to have that, clearly spelled out there. They don't really work as intended when they're condensed. So having that turning radii for the buses in there really will help the throughput. So just my thought.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment?
What exactly is the motion right now? Can we, just so I can have it clear?
I'll take my shot at it. Or Mr. Dinwiddie, would you like to take that one?
The current motion is that we are replacing conditions 8 through 13. And I could...
The biggest problem is we've got a mover, a seconder, and a long discussion on it. So I'm not sure that's a good idea at this time.
The current motion is to revise department conditions, dropping 8 through 13, replacing it with petitioner's condition 7, and with to move on that.
So that's the motion before us to amend. Is everyone clear? Is there objection to the amendment? Seeing none, that is approved. Now we're to the main motion. Are there any other amendments? Mr. Garcia.
I'd like to make a motion to add number 13 back into staff's recommendations. I believe I'm following procedure correctly there.
You hit the motion button and it'll record. And we need a second. Mr. Gasek, thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I believe the underpass would provide a good means and methods in this situation for both commuters during heavy traffic periods and event timing. I could see how a person on a bicycle could be left out of view, or a pedestrian could be missed by a car dealing with a roundabout situation. And I understand that DOT requires the walkways around the roundabout, but I feel that the bike path is a very good staff recommendation. And I plan on supporting my own motion.
Great. Mr. Gasek.
I'll be supporting the motion too. That read my mind. But I'd like to support it too, because it's really important to have additional pedestrian and bicycle access throughout the whole area, and it's one of the goals of the UMed plan is to improve bicycle and pedestrian access, and I think this will help facilitate that in that area, getting better access to the already existing underpass. So I'll be supporting it too.
Okay. Mr. Pratt?
Yeah, I'll be supporting the motion also. It may be the best thing. As I understand the motion and the recommendation, it's just to ask the petitioner to consider making these improvements, but it won't actually require them to do anything but give it due consideration. And that grounds, I will support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. I will not be supporting the motion. I don't think that it's appropriate to have an additional grade separation on Health Drive pedestrian facilities. So since there is objection, we will use our machines. So that motion passes. We are now on to the main motion, and I'd like to entertain some additional discussions. And I was also reminded by the Secretary that we only have one case here and one motion to take care of. And so we really can't vote on this main motion and then have another motion to deal with the off-site improvements, is her opinion. So that if we're going to deal with the off-site improvements, we need to do that now, and we need to do it through an amendment to our main motion, whether we want to include those off-site improvements, because as Mr. Tybor clarified, his motion did not include those, that it was only for the on-site improvements. So procedurally, that's how we need to go forward. If the board would like to discuss the main motion and the site work before we get to the off-site improvements, I'd like to entertain those additional discussions now, and then go on to the amendment for the off-site improvements. Is there any additional board discussion? Mr.
Just so I understand the process for future reference, that's because what we're really voting on is case 2011-141.
Yes.
Whatever that means, and that's the only thing that's before us.
Right. That's my understanding of our clarification. So, is there any additional discussion on the motion and the site improvements? Seeing none, I would take a positive motion to amend to add in the off-site improvements if that is the desire of the board. Mr. Tybor?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will move to amend my original motion, or my amended original motion to include the off-site improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Tybor, and a second by Mr. Dinwiddie. Would you like to discuss your motion to amend?
Yes, originally I had not considered including it because I thought it would be, I think it would offer due consideration to separate them, but if we're able to have a discussion that satisfies any of the other commissioners' concerns before we vote, I'm fine with that, and I would support that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dinwiddie.
Yeah, as I discussed and mentioned before, I fully support adding the off-site amenities into this for the reasons I stated before.
Thank you. At this point, I will not be supporting the motion. When I read the packet and read the application, I didn't see any mention of the off-site improvements or the details. I personally support roundabouts, and I hope a roundabout is the ultimate solution here, but that decision has not been made, so I just don't feel comfortable dealing with those off-site improvements at this point. There's a separate process for dealing with off-site public improvements for roads. There's submittal standards that go along with those, and this submittal comes nowhere near to dealing with any of those. Mr. Schoenthal may be right. This is a DOT right-of-way, and we typically don't see DOT projects, but we do typically see public and city improvements as they come back, and this will be handled under a memorandum of agreement and an improvement of public place with the municipality. So I suspect it will come back. And again, I hope a roundabout is the solution. I think it's a good option here. But for those reasons, I will not be supporting the motion. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Dinwiddie?
Yeah, I would strongly urge the board to support the motion so that we don't further muddy the water on the process. And I can't remember the last time. We didn't look at Huffman Road. We didn't look at Elmore Extension. There's a lot of DOT projects that haven't ever been before this board. So I would trust that we defer to the DOT to build what they see fit and come in line with the original intentions of the petitioner.
Is there any other board comments? Since there is objection, we'll use our machines. This is a vote on the amendment to add the off-site improvements as part of the main motion. And that motion passes. Now we are to the main motion, and Mr. Garcia's clarification, it's for both the site plan and the landscape plan, concept landscape plan. So we're dealing with both approvals simultaneously. Is there any other board comments or discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I did have a question just to remind the commission. There was talk earlier about possibly including the 2 sidewalk connections from the consortium library parking lot. Was that, I don't know if that was overlooked or not intended, but just to remind you.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Mr. Gasek?
That was exactly what I was going to bring up, so thanks, Sharon. But it was to amend that motion to include sidewalks on the west side sidewalk of that parking lot, that little extension there. So I have to word that a little bit better, I think.
So how would you word that condition?
It's provide details on, provide details, or, sorry, I'm looking.
Yeah. How about construct pedestrian improvements?
Yes, construct pedestrian improvements. There you go, on the west side of the parking lot.
Yeah. So will that be new condition number 13 then? Since we've kind of renumbered everything.
That we're on, yes.
Great. Is on the west side, is that a sufficient description?
I don't know.
It's on page 39.
You can
make reference to page 39?
Yeah.
Yeah. On page 39, what is north of Providence Drive?
Trying to get my packet straight. I guess it would be as shown on Exhibit B, pedestrian access to the sports arena from the north side of Providence Drive.
Right.
We okay with that motion, Madam Secretary? Have we captured that?
In a roundabout way, sorry for that.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you. Is there a second for this motion to amend? Mr. Pratt, thank you. Would you like to speak to your motion, Mr. Gasek?
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I think it's an important housekeeping thing to have on there to make sure that that connection gets captured, because it's an important part of the circulation plan of the site as a whole. So it needs to be captured in a condition. So I'll be supporting it.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Pratt, do you have anything else to add?
No.
Thank you. Is there objection to the motion? Mr. Tybor?
Yes, Mr. Commissioner, I don't have an objection, but before voting on it, I was wondering if it would be possible to hear from the petitioner if they have any concerns about this condition.
Sure, I have no objection to that. Mr. Schoenthal, does the UAA have any concerns over this additional condition?
We have no concerns, as stated, sidewalk on the west side of the consortium library parking lot in a connection from the consortium library parking lot to the Providence Drive walkway.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on the amendment, the current amendment? Is there objection? Seeing none, that's approved. And we're back to the main motion again. Is there any additional discussion on the main motion? Is there objection? As amended. Seeing no objection, that is approved. Yay!
Thank you.
How are you doing? Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the friendly amendment. I hate it, but I'll approve it. I'm just being the contrarian. That brings us to the next items on our agenda. There's no appearance request tonight. Reports. I don't have any reports tonight. I did see an additional application went through to the mayor's office for another board member. I haven't followed that up yet. I will. And hopefully we'll get the person that applied is an architect, which is some talent that we could use on this board at this point, I think. It would be a good addition, so hopefully she'll be approved. And I will check with Jay and see how that's going. Sharon, do you have any reports for us?
Yeah, just to say at next month's meeting, we should have another commissioner. She's a landscape architect. She's coming for an orientation here next week or sometime soon. So she should be on board next month.
Great.
And then, yes, Jim, if you could follow up with Jay, that'd be great.
Yeah. Are there any other board member comments? Mr. Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The law department would like us, all boards and commissions, to verbally be on the record with the appeal procedures for each case. It's on the agenda sheet. It's sometimes mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. The zoning board likes to say it right at the start and then after each individual case. The law department feels that's important. So for future reference.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is especially important when you're going to deny a case.
Right.
Because then you have to let the applicant know that there is an appeal process and then state that verbally so they're aware that they have a certain number of days to get their appeal in. Otherwise, it really muddies the waters.
Okay. Is it important to go through that appeal process for consent agenda items, or is it just the public hearing items?
The public hearings, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question on that. Would that not include the cases that are under the regular agenda as well, even though they are not public hearings, as is an action of the commission?
By the book, it's any appealable item, so it's practically anything you take action on. Appealing of a resolution is a less common thing. I'm not too concerned about that, but regular agenda items, public hearing items, the fire station for tonight, if it looked like there had ever been any opposition to it. And it's equally important. I don't want to discuss the case that this is happening with, or that has brought this about, but whether it's an appeal or a denial from the commission, it's important because in the case I'm thinking of, the commission voted to approve, and now it's people who are in objection to that who are appealing. So.
Yes, and as Al said, the commission might just get in the habit of announcing that at the start of the meeting, just a habit, because even if it is approved, a case is approved, and it looks like everyone is happy with it, you never know. There could be some neighbor that is unhappy with it and wants to appeal.
Okay. Typically, I don't go through the public hearing procedures until we have a public hearing, but it might be good just to go through all those procedures at the beginning of the meeting, including the appeal process. Okay, we can do that. There any board member comments? Motion to adjourn? Everyone's on that. And with that, we are adjourned.